Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me as we've been announcing Joel Rosenberg in studio with us today. New book out, The Kremlin Conspiracy, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But this is one of those days where so many events in the news will certainly focus our time and attention. It turns out that Rex Tillerson is no longer Secretary of State. He found out by looking at Twitter. That's probably the best way to let someone go, and actually we'll talk about the significance of that. But more importantly, we have, of course, in studio somebody that knows Mike Pompeo. As a matter of fact, if you go to joelrosenberg.com, to his blog, you'll see a picture of the two of them right there, and they've known each other for some time. And even USA Today saying Mike Pompeo has the opportunity to shake up Russia, China policy, and reform the State Department. So we have lots to talk about. Joel Rosenberg, a good friend of ours, New York Times best-selling author, all sorts of novels, nonfiction books, individual that we just value so much in terms of being our eyes and ears in Israel. And last time you and I were together, we were at Word of Life.
That was wonderful, up there in the beautiful Adirondack Mountains, where I grew up. I spent a lot of my childhood in those mountains, and that was fun to teach the scriptures. Not quite side by side, but we got to do different sessions.
If you ever go to Word of Life, you're in one venue, I'm in another, and then we see each other on the as we go by. Right. And if it weren't for dinners, we would never have seen each other.
But it was a wonderful time.
It was really great to meet your family and everything as well. Well, you've got all sorts of comments, I know, because you've known Mike Pompeo since the time he was in Congress. He's been the CIA director. And here's a man that really has had the ear of the president. Is that fair?
He has. Look, any time that a reader of my political thrillers gets elevated to the vice presidency, Mike Pence, I just saw him last week. He's like, hey, I was at NRB, and he says, he gave me a hug, and he said, where's my new, the copy of your new book? So, now Pompeo, I'm encouraged. This is an excellent decision by President Trump,
right,
who is clearly finding his way in terms of building a team that he feels comfortable with, that he trusts, and that bring the level of experience that he does not have in foreign and national security policy, as well as just running a government. Pompeo is interesting because he fits Trump's approach of the type of person he likes. He likes generals and military guys. Now, Pompeo was never a general, but he was first in his class at West Point. Right. He served as an officer in the United States Army. He got a lawyer, a law degree from Harvard. And he served on the House Intelligence Committee for years. So he knows the intelligence community. He understands the intersection between Congress, the administration, the intelligence services, and diplomacy. And he's smart. I mean, he's funny, and he's got the type of personality that is connected well with the president. Now, the CIA director does not usually brief the president every day in what's known as the presidential daily brief, where you have between a half hour or an hour to walk the president through the most important things that the intelligence community needs the president to know.
It's usually a staffer that does
exactly.
That, right? Yeah.
But President Trump specifically chose Mike Pompeo to give that briefing to him almost every single day for the last, 13, 14 months. This has built a very good relationship. The president doesn't tolerate people around him if he doesn't like them and trust them. I mean, just, you can see it. You find out one day you're gone. And I don't know that any cabinet official in the Trump administration has spent more time with the president than Mike Pompeo. And this is one of the reasons that it's important, because they trust each other. But the other reason is because if you're the Secretary of State, world leaders have to know that you have the ear and the confidence of the president, and you really understand what his policies are and where he's heading. It was clear from the beginning that Rex Tillerson did not have that relationship, didn't build that relationship for whatever reason. I think he's a good man. There's no evidence that he's not an honorable person. He's not a kind person, a smart person. He was a tremendous ExxonMobil CEO. But that doesn't necessarily translate into being the nation's lead diplomat, especially for a president who is so new to it and unconventional, to say the least. And often Tillerson would say something and it was completely off message from what the president wanted. So I think this is going to be an excellent change. I wish Tillerson well. I don't know him personally. But I think Mike Pompeo is going to come in, and everybody in the world is going to know when this guy speaks, he's speaking for the president. He's also speaking to the president. Right. The president's listening to his counsel. But one other thing, you and I were talking about it before we went on air. The CIA director is not allowed by law.
That's true.
To provide policy guidance to the president. He is supposed to
just give the intelligence.
Yeah, bring it. Well, just the facts, ma'am. Right. Yeah. In the old Joe Friday Dragnet movie. Yeah. What are the facts that we know from intelligence gathering, and what do they mean, or what might they mean? That's as far as you can go. This now allows Pompeo at state to not only speak into, but actually craft Russia policy, because he's tough on Russia. So I say thank God, because I don't think the president has been tough enough. We can talk about that later.
I know.
North Korea policy, as we head into these high-stakes negotiations with the leader of North Korea. Iran, not negotiations, but what do we do with the Iran nuclear deal that's so disastrous? Tillerson was for keeping it. The president is not. So that was a source of contention. And then, of course, the Arab-Israeli tensions and the possibility, hopefully someday, for peace. So these are big issues at a highly volatile season in global affairs, among the most dangerous and volatile as any time in the post-World War II environment. So I think it's a great decision by the president.
There were all sorts of rumors that Rex Tillerson was on the way out, but one of the ones that was a real warning flag to me is, you might remember about a week ago, Rex Tillerson says, there are no negotiations with North Korea. We're not talking to North Korea. And the next day, South Korea says, oh, I think North Korea leader wants to sit down with your leader. And I thought, how could you be that far out of the loop and not know that? Yeah,
I don't know how you could be. But look, the thing that was the kiss of death, though, wasn't all the disconnect. It was that he called the president a moron.
That too.
Now, how he didn't get fired that day, I don't know. I mean, he never denied it, which it was actually painful to watch him not deny it. Yeah. He said, I don't want to get into that. That's old news. I'm not going to get into that petty. If you didn't say it, you just say, that's ridiculous. I didn't do it. So we all know he did it. And it was time to move on.
With Mike Pompeo, again, just the whole idea of China policy as well, Russia. Let's talk about that after we get back from the break, because it leads obviously into the Kremlin conspiracy. This is a president, I think I could be fair in saying, that does not hold back in criticizing anybody, even some people that don't deserve to be criticized. But there's one individual that never seems to get criticized. That's Vladimir Putin, right? So
that's true.
That's just
he's been radio silent on Putin, and that needs to change.
Yes, and of course you have an election coming up, so we'll talk about that as well. And while we're talking about CIA directors, one other former director of the CIA, Porter Goss, endorses this. James Woolsey, I think, endorses that, and we just mentioned Michael Pompeo. Do you know everybody at the CIA, or just all the leaders?
But I'm honored to know these three, and they've been very friendly and very helpful. They don't give me enough information. They never give me classified information.
Yeah, we're going to take a break. Joel Rosenberg in studio. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, one of the questions that surfaces repeatedly from the shooting in Parkland, Florida, is why the FBI and local law enforcement didn't do more to stop him. He was a ticking time bomb who posted a number of threatening messages, and he assaulted students, cursed at teachers, kicked in classroom doors, started fistfights, and threw chairs. Despite all of this behavior online and in person, he was never arrested. He was transferred from school to school, and he eventually was sent back to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, but no other action was taken. One possible explanation was the Promise program that was developed to keep young people out of the criminal justice system. It was enacted as a policy to end the school-to-prison pipeline. Proponents wanted to prevent minority students from ending up in prison because they were disciplined at school. Their concern was that when the police are on a school campus, in order to protect students, they end up arresting students for minor offenses. These students then get a criminal record, which often leads to prison rather than to college. The Promise program was implemented at Broward County 4 years ago because it had the most school-related arrests in Florida. The agreement with the Broward County Public Schools prevented the police from dealing with misdemeanors and other offenses. Instead, school administrators would deal with such issues. That may explain why there seemed to be a hands-off policy towards the shooter and other students. Proponents reject the idea that the Promise program prevented legal action against the shooter. They point out that he was expelled from the school for disciplinary reasons a year before the shooting. While that's true, you have to wonder about the impact such a policy had in creating a mindset that prevented intervention by law enforcement. I think this explains why so little action was taken against the shooter. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment, I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG in theaters March 16th. More information at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have Joel Rosenberg in studio today. And by the way, if you'd like to watch, feel free to go online, or you can go to Facebook Live, a number of different places you can watch this. Later, of course, the podcast of this will be available if you'd like to listen to it again or send it to others. Of course, you can go to our YouTube channel to watch it. And if you have not seen it, this is the new book just out, The Kremlin Conspiracy by Joel Rosenberg. And since we were talking about Russia for just a minute, let's mention your book. But a little bit later, I want to get into the fact that we almost have the Mideast peace plan nearly finished, says the New York Times. Is it dead on arrival? I think I know what your answer is going to be on that one. And then one that I thought was kind of interesting. Ivanka has a framed copy of her father's Jerusalem speech in her office. So, and of course, we haven't had you in studio to talk about moving the capital to Jerusalem. It's always been the capital, but moving the embassy there is just all sorts of other topics. But while we're on Russia for just a minute, fascinating story. Marcus Riker finds himself, first of all, defending the president, but then wondering if he's going to have to intervene in Russian politics. I don't want to give too much away because it's a fictional book, but give us the background, because if nothing else, it just reminds us that Russia's been in the news. So I wasn't surprised to see that your new book is on Russia.
Well, as you know, Kerby, I've mostly written my political thrillers, these novels over the years about challenges in the Middle East,
right.
Worst case scenarios that are coming out of radical Islamism or apocalyptic Islamism. But I needed to reshuffle the deck. I needed to just professionally, I can't write about the Middle East every single book. I need to just look for other enemies where evil is rising someplace else. Mm-hmm. And my eye kept being drawn to Vladimir Putin. So I decided to write a political thriller, The Kremlin Conspiracy, which you're right, just came out last week. That dealt, my main Russian dictator is Alexander Luganov. He's not Putin, but he's Putin-esque, okay?
Yes.
But he's rising to power, and the premise is that while a new American president, new to the presidency, new to foreign policy, has his eye on North Korea and Iran, that the Russian president is planning a lightning-fast grab of 1, 2, or maybe 3 of the Baltic states. These are NATO allies right on the border of Russia: Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania.
Right.
Now you think, why would he care? Why would you do that? There's no
small.
oil or gas there. There's no big natural resources. Well, first of all, the Russian dictator in the novel, the Kremlin Conspiracy, what he wants is to completely undermine the NATO alliance. He wants to prove that he's the world leader and everyone needs to kiss his ring. So what he thinks to do is, if he thinks in 96 hours he could send 100,000 troops racing across the border and grab one or more of these Baltic states. Yes, they are under NATO protection, what's known as Article 5,
Right.
which is the Mutual Defense Pact. If one country is attacked, every country in NATO considers itself under attack, and they all come to the rescue. That's the premise. It's only been tested one time, when the United States was attacked on September 11th, 2001, and NATO did kick in and help us fight al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan. Otherwise, it's been incredibly successful in not having to fight.
Right.
By being unified, the Soviet Union didn't invade. But the gamble that this Russian dictator in the Kremlin Conspiracy is making is, if I go grab one or more of those countries, is the United States of America, is the rest of NATO, are they really going to go to war with Russia? Are they going to risk nuclear war to rescue some country that most Americans can't find on a map? And his gamble is, the answer is no, they're not going to do it. If I can grab it, they will not come and rescue it. And if they don't, the theory is that's the end of NATO. You can't have a NATO alliance if one or more countries get invaded and nobody comes to their rescue. Nobody believes you anymore. And that's where Marcus Riker shows up.
Yes.
Former Marine, former U.S. Secret Service agent, some personal tragedies in his life that I won't go into on the air, but he finds himself, it was a fiction, but he finds himself in Moscow on private business, and he just happens to be at the vortex of the storm when all hell breaks loose, and at the most dangerous moment in U.S.-Russian relations. And boy, I had a lot of fun writing this novel. I hope people enjoy reading it, but I enjoyed just doing something different, and it was fun to do the research on it. I've been to Russia several times. My family escaped out of Russia.
That's what I was going to say. Your family background, ultimately, yeah.
On my father's side, they were Orthodox Jews who escaped in 1906 when the last Tsar was in power, Tsar Nicholas II, fomenting just horrific anti-Semitic attacks known as the pogroms, leading to the death of 60,000 Jewish people. The rape, the beating, the torture of tens of thousands of more Jews, burning their houses, stealing their property. So our family was able to escape. They got to America. This is where we found freedom. This is where we found Christ, here in the United States. So, but my eye, I think, in my DNA, in my history, my personal interest has always been on Russia, then the Soviet Union. I was there in 1986 for a month when it was still the Soviet Union, the evil empire, smuggling in Bibles, sharing the gospel with college students there. It was fascinating. I mean, I just thought, James Bond for Jesus. I mean, it was just the coolest opportunity. But then I got to go back about 10 years ago when Putin was in power. Took my father. He had never been. And I was doing research for a book back in that time. But I hadn't returned to the topic in a while. And I had the opportunity to sit down I had dinner with the former Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper. Great friend of the United States, great friend of Israel, but a NATO leader, a NATO leader who had stared down Putin, been in the room with him, been in the NATO meetings. And I said, I really want to meet a NATO leader and spend time as I do research for a book like this. And we had 3 hours of a private dinner, just one-on-one, built a friendship out of that. And then other former CIA directors that I know who've been helpful on a book like this. A former chief economic advisor to Vladimir Putin. So again, it's not Putin, but I wanted to craft somebody who, again, was Putin-esque. Because I believe, personally, shifting away from the Kremlin conspiracy to real life, I believe Vladimir Putin is the most dangerous leader on the planet right now. And
you wouldn't know that if you listen to the Trump administration.
Well, look,
or even the Obama administration.
Well, Obama was terrible on the Russia issue. I mean, complete softness, weakness. Vladimir Lenin once said, "Probe with bayonets. Yeah. If you find mush, push. If you find steel, stop." In the Obama years, Putin was probing, and he found mush, and he invaded country after country after country.
Yeah.
Dissidents are dying. The press was being shut down. He was consolidating power. Now, President Trump, to his credit, his policies have been good mostly. He's increasing U.S. defense spending. He's pushing NATO to spend more on their own defense, and they're doing it.
Right.
He has put tremendously good people around him, as we've been discussing. Mike Pence at VP, Nikki Haley at UN, Mike Pompeo at CIA and now State, Jim Mattis. Jim Mattis, the four-star general.
You start with a quote from Jim Mattis.
Exactly.
I love that.
Look, you would not, if you're soft on Putin, there's no reason to put the former supreme commander of NATO as your defense secretary. It doesn't fit. I don't see the Kremlin conspiracy here. When I write Kremlin conspiracy, that's not what I mean.
Yeah.
So policy and personnel-wise, the president has done well. The problem that Mr. Trump has is he's radio silent on the issue of Putin. He's tougher on Jeff Sessions than he is on the worst dictator on the planet. And I don't understand it. I don't pretend to understand. I'm trying to figure it out. But this president needs to show steel. He needs to be tough. He needs to lay out a comprehensive strategy to deal with Russia, deal with Putin, counter the Putin threat. So he gets a B- at the moment. Policy good, personnel good, but when you're not showing leadership, that's a problem. And you counter one other thing, Kirby, contrast what he's doing with North Korea.
Oh, yes.
Trump is calling the leader Rocket Man, right? Yeah. He's constantly tweeting aggressively to deal with this threat. He's laying out speeches where he talks about the threat. He sends Pence and Mattis and all these others over to the region. He's flying U.S. nuclear-armed aircraft over the Korean Peninsula. He's strengthening these alliances in the region. He's deploying naval forces. And it's gotten the attention of the North Korean leader. So he's not doing any of that with Putin. Why not?
That's a good question. I wish we had an answer, but maybe Mike Pompeo is a step in the right direction.
He is. He definitely is.
Even USA Today suggests that might be a possibility. We're going to take a break, and let me just suggest that as we go to the break, this would be a good time for you to go to our website, pointofview.net. We have a link to joelrosenberg.com, or you can go there directly. He's posted a blog today about some of the switches in policy and personnel. Of course, all the information about this book and all of his other books are available there as well. We'll continue our conversation with Joel Rosenberg right after these important messages.
From Affirm Films, the studio that brought you Risen and War Room, comes Paul, Apostle of Christ. Two men challenged an empire in order to live out the gospel of Jesus Christ and spread their message to the world.
Where sin abounds, grace abounds more.
Starring Jim Caviezel. Paul, Apostle of Christ. Rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. In theaters March 23rd. More information is available at paulmovie.com.
Few of us get the chance to really make a difference, but today you have an opportunity. The question is whether you will seize it. Becoming a Truth Team partner with Point of View magnifies your impact in this generation and perhaps for many to come. When you stop what you're doing and call us or give online, you invest in hard work that has changed lives and communities for 45 years. Grab this opportunity. Call 800-347-5151 or visit pointofview.net/team. Don't let this opportunity pass by. Join the team and make a difference. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
In studio with us, Joel Rosenberg. His new book out, The Kremlin Conspiracy. You should be able to find it in your local bookstore, published by Tyndale. A real page-turner, and it will help you understand some of the events in the news. Obviously, it's fiction, but it's thinly veiled in some places. It reads a lot like what you see in the newspapers every day. So I think you will enjoy that. And again, just kind of a who's who of individuals that have endorsed it. I mentioned Porter Goss just a minute ago, Brigadier General Tata. As a matter of fact, we were even talking about the fact that the book starts with a rather arresting quote from James Mattis. You got to love a guy that's known as, Mad Dog, okay? But be polite, be professional, but have a plan to kill everybody you meet. That's how you start that book. And then you also have Winston Churchill quote. Let's just for a minute mention that people can find these books and others, as well as lots of other great resources at joelrosenberg.com. I think I'd be remiss if I did not mention that some people might want to come to Israel this summer because you have put together an event that is really exciting.
Well, thank you. Yes, I hope people will be interested. We've got, in fact, we're almost filled with the Joshua Fund tour. But we've got what's called an Epicenter Prayer Summit. Mm-hmm. The summit is July 11th and 12th. Anne Graham Lotz, the wonderful Bible teacher, daughter of the late Billy Graham. What a loss. But we have her, and she's fabulous and a good close friend. She'll be one of the keynotes. Pastor Ronnie Floyd from Northwest Arkansas. I was just at his church preaching this weekend and spent the weekend with he and his wife and team. He's the former president of the Southern Baptist Convention. Mm-hmm. He'll also be a keynote, and myself. But we're just there, in a sense, to frame sort of theologically, biblically, the importance of prayer and look at it from a couple different angles. But in between our messages, I think, are the real highlights. Israeli and Palestinian pastors and ministry leaders will be sharing, when we say pray for the peace of Jerusalem, yeah, we do mean geopolitical peace. We also mostly want the gospel to be preached to everybody in the region. But after that, a lot of us say, well, how do I pray for the peace of Jerusalem? What specifically do I pray? And that's because we don't know really what's happening in the region. So when you hear from Israeli pastors, Palestinian pastors, when you see the unity between Israeli, Jewish, and Palestinian Arab believers, you're not seeing that on the geopolitical stage. But in Christ, we are one. Doesn't mean we agree on everything, but I think it's important, and that's what the summit will be about. And I think so that's wonderful. And there are still seats available on the Joshua Fund's tour, but Anna's bringing a tour, Ronnie's bringing a tour, and a number of other organizations all converging for that Epicenter Prayer Summit. People can learn more about it at joshuafund.com.
And again, you can go to joelrosenberg.com, and there's a link to Joshua Fund.
That's true. That might be easier way.
So we have both the links there as well. And so please
if I can add just one thing, sorry, I was just thinking some of your listeners may not know what the Joshua Fund is.
Right.
So my wife and I founded the Joshua Fund as a nonprofit ministry 12 years ago. The goal was to educate and mobilize Christians to bless Israel and her neighbors. So we work in Israel, in the Palestinian territories, and in 5 Arab countries: Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and Iraq. And I think of it like a venture capital firm. Essentially, we are investing in small but promising and growing congregations and ministries to help them reach more people, disciple more people, plant more churches, provide humanitarian relief to Syrian refugees, Iraqi refugees, Holocaust survivors. So it's got an evangelistic discipleship component, a pastoral encouragement component, humanitarian relief, and then the education of the church. What is God's heart for both Jews and Arabs? We don't believe that the Bible is either or, although some evangelicals are. We're not. We believe God loves both and that this is a ministry that invests in the future of the church on both sides.
And again, Joshua Fund, and you can find that at joelrosenberg.com or go directly to that. And while we're talking about Israel, I guess it's about time. We have not had you in studio until now to talk about moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now, there was a time when we had some embassies in Jerusalem, and of course we know that the United Nations actually changed that because there was so much pressure. And you know as well as I do that almost every president, all the way back, Bill Clinton talked about this, George W. Bush talked about this, Barack Obama talked about this, Donald Trump talked about it, but he decided to do it. And so they've always talked about it. But what are the possible implications of moving the American embassy to Jerusalem?
Well, first, let's take a few pieces at a time. One, of course, Israelis are ecstatic about this because Israel is the only country on the planet that the American embassy isn't in the declared capital, which is unusual. It's unusual given that the U.S. embassy is in the capital of all of our enemies. Yeah. that we have relationships with. Why not in one of our best friends?
Yes.
So Israelis are thrilled. I mean, we've been going on without it for 70 years, so it's not like it's caused damage, but it does send a message that Jerusalem's sort of up for grabs. Now, the embassy is actually being moved to West Jerusalem, and it's not. And so the president signaled that the boundaries of Jerusalem were still open for negotiation. Now, the Palestinians have reacted very negatively, and they don't want to negotiate. So that's going to be an issue. They could negotiate it, but so far they have not. Now, my challenge is, as an evangelical, as somebody who believes that Jerusalem is the Jewish capital, I'm supportive of the president's decision. But I also love my Palestinian Christian friends. And they struggle with this. This feels to them like it makes their life more difficult. They're evangelical Palestinians, and now they're being tagged with this evangelical support for President Trump's very controversial decision, and it makes it difficult for them to be a witness in their community because Muslims aren't happy about this. And Jordanian Christians, Egyptian Christians, I've spent time with all their leaders in the last few months. They're not happy about it either. So it's difficult if you love both sides. Yeah. It's one of these things that, the Bible doesn't say where an embassy should be. We're supposed to be ambassadors for Christ, which means loving both sides. So it just makes it a little bit more complicated. And people aren't going to always agree, but we have to do it lovingly and respectfully, having that conversation. Overall, I think it's a positive. Because I hope what it does is it brings the Palestinians and the Israelis back to the table. In the end, we want a negotiated conclusion to this thing. I don't think you're going to have lasting peace if you don't have that. But we haven't seen real negotiations in quite some time. So maybe this in some way will kickstart them. That's certainly the president's theory.
Again, the New York Times says the Mideast peace process and peace plan is nearly finished. Is it dead on arrival? And part of the difficulty, Joel, as you have talked about so well on this program before, is you have to have honest brokers coming to the table. And when one side wants the other side to be pushed into the sea, makes it a little difficult to come up with any kind of resolution, doesn't it?
Well, yes. Now, you sit down with your Palestinian friends, Christian or Muslim, and they will say, no, we've got a list of all the things that the Israelis have done to make it so that these negotiations have gotten derailed. So both sides have their case, their narrative, and but the bottom line is Israel has a country and is a growing and a thriving country after 70 years. The Palestinians have had, at the leadership level, has had an extremely difficult time of getting to what they could say yes to. And Palestinians are suffering. Some of that is Israel's fault, but not all of it. And you look at Gaza. Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip in 2005. It was a highly controversial move when Ariel Sharon, then Israeli prime minister, did it. But there's not a single Israeli citizen there. There's not a single Israeli soldier in Gaza. They've got beachfront property. They've got natural gas, trillions of gallons of natural gas right off the coast. They've got smart people, but they've turned it into a hellhole. I mean, I'm sorry. Hamas took over. People voted for Hamas, and they started firing rockets at Israel, and it's not clear why. Israel withdrew. We're not occupying a single inch of Gaza, and yet it's the worst case scenario. So So the people there are suffering horribly because Israel has to respond. The infrastructure's destroyed. Hamas keeps taking billions of dollars in international aid, and they build terror tunnels so they can sneak under our territory, pop up, and kill us. It's a disaster, and we need to find a way, prayerfully, that miraculously get to a point where things would just quiet down and people could live their lives.
We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll finish off our conversation today with Joel Rosenberg. And again, if you have just joined us, I've been talking about his new book. It's just out, The Kremlin Conspiracy. It's published by Tyndale. You can certainly find it in your local bookstore, but also we have a link to his website in which you can find out about many other books, and I certainly would commend to you some of those. For example, Epicenter, Inside the Revolution, and many other nonfiction books, as well as his thrillers. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Mainers want their state lawmakers to see red, at least while they're hunting. Amish families throughout the state of Maine hunt for their food. As you may know, the Amish religiously shun many modern conveniences in accordance with their religious customs requiring a simple life. That includes while they're hunting. You see, most states require hunters to wear blaze orange while hunting. This increases visibility to other hunters and increases hunter safety. But it's pretty flashy, too flashy, in fact, for the simple ways of the Amish. So they are asking for a religious accommodation in the law. If approved, Amish Mainers will be permitted to wear red instead of blaze orange. It would seem to be in the best interest of Maine to follow the lead of several states in providing this accommodation. Several Amish have pledged to disobey the blaze orange law and, if cited, refuse to pay the fine. This simple accommodation would prevent the needless punishment by the state of its religious citizens and any lawsuits challenging such a burden on the free exercise of their religion. But it should not have to go to court. By a simple spin of the color wheel and a few votes in the legislature, it would seem that the state could achieve its interest in hunter safety while honoring the religious conscience of the Amish. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes in studio with us today, Joel Rosenberg, the new book out, The Kremlin Conspiracy. And I thought we might just mention that there are elections taking place in Russia. Matter of fact, we're going to be having elections here in the United States. But that is striking because now you sort of have China, leader for life. You're wondering eventually you're just going to have Putin, leader for life.
Absolutely. I would almost guarantee that he wants to be a czar.
Yes.
He doesn't want to run every 6 years. That's their system. No, I think he is more likely to to say if the Chinese can do it,
they can do it.
The Russians can do it. So
what about this? How do we think about Russia? This sort of gets back to paying attention to not only who the president is right now, but we have 35 Senate races, 435 races for the House of Representatives. I'd like to know where my representative stands on Russia and whether or not they'd back other kinds of sanctions or actions that the president might take.
I think that Russia is going to be a key issue in the 2018 midterm elections, Kirby. And I think that because, first of all the intelligence chiefs, including Pompeo, just testified that the Russians did meddle. They actively tried to subvert our elections in 2016. They were not successful,
yes,
but they did try, and they're going to try again.
I think so.
The intelligence chief said. So Russia's a player because they're forcing themselves into be a player. Number one. Number two, we just did a poll that we released on the eve of the release of the novel, The Kremlin Conspiracy. It was a national poll, and we found that 72% of Americans see Vladimir Putin as a, quote, clear and present danger,
yes,
unquote, to the national security of the United States and our allies. What issue can you think of that 3 out of 4 Americans agree on almost anything right now? So the fact that Putin is galvanizing a unified fear and concern is important, because we also asked, one of the questions in the poll was, and you can find this poll at joelrosenberg.com on my blog, but we asked, has President Trump convinced you that he understands the threat fully and is taking every action that he can to counter the Russian threat effectively? Or has he not yet convinced you, and you're concerned about his relationship with Putin, and you want him to do much more? So we kind of gave people two very different options. 52% of Americans said that President Trump has not yet convinced them that he gets it and that he's doing enough to stop it.
Right.
That's pretty striking, because it means that Republicans also see that, not just Democrats, and independents particularly. So I think it's going to be an issue that every member of the House and those who are running in the Senate are going to have a clearly defined policy towards Putin and Russia. And the president's going to have one, too.
Yes. Well, while you're talking about elections, we are in the midst of elections right now, and those are going to be important. Primary took place in Texas, one in Pennsylvania today, and all sorts of others playing out in a general election. And when you look back even a year or two ago, I think it'd be fair to say that of the 17 Republican candidates, Donald Trump was 18th on your list, right?
Mine, yes. I was a never Trumper till the Thursday before the election. And
so what do you
living in Israel,
now?
we were, had to make a decision. And look, I ultimately voted for President Trump reluctantly. I'm candid about it.
Yes.
I looked at his past, and I wasn't convinced that he was a conservative or that he would do the things that he promised. However, I did see him choose Mike Pence, who's both a personal friend, and he and his wife are fans of the novels. And I think my wife did say at one point, "You're really going to vote against a ticket where one of the members is a fan of your novels? I mean, is that your plan?" I thought, all right, well, maybe not.
Your wife. That's a great line.
But also, I knew what Hillary Clinton would do, and I knew that I couldn't go there.
Yes.
And candidate Trump had said, "I will pick federal judges that are conservative, strict constructionists. I will pick Supreme Court justices from this specific list," and the list was good. He said he would be pro-Israel. He said he would increase defense spending. He said he would cut taxes. I wasn't sure whether I could believe him. But I will tell you, a little over a year in, Kirby, that I have been struck by how much better the president has done than I was fearful that he would. I mean, he has kept his word in many areas. And his personnel is mostly good. Those that have not been good choices tend to implode and get kicked out. And they tend to get replaced, not always, but tend to get replaced by people that are better, more professional, more serious. Look, the process is exhausting to watch in Washington.
Oh, yes.
And but the results have been very, very positive. There are areas that still bother me. I mean, obviously, the economy is doing great. The stock market's doing great. Jobs are booming. Even in Hispanic unemployment is lowest ever. African-American unemployment, lowest ever. It's extraordinary. Wealth is growing. Wages are rising. That's what he said he would do. and he is a business guy. He's doing it, so he gets a lot of credit. He's been great on Israel. He's been great on rebuilding relationship with the Sunni Arab world, Egypt, Jordan, the Saudis, the Emirates. That's positive, too. And, of course, he's doing well in Asia. Not so good with Russia yet, but I think that can change, and I pray that it does. There are areas. I don't like the tweets.
No, for sure.
I don't like how people get
anybody that just thinks they're wonderful.
I don't like I don't like how critical he is. It's a little snarky for my taste from a president.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of the way people get dismissed from the administration like they're an East German who just disappears in the dead of night. Back in the Soviet era. Yeah. I mean, look, Tillerson's he's a Texan, so I should be particularly respectful of him here, but I am. I like him. I don't know him, but I think he's a good man. He left the best job in business to come help the president. The president wasn't pleased. Okay, but I think he deserves a phone call to say, listen, we disagree on some things. I appreciate your service. In a few hours, I'm gonna make an announcement. I just think that's a decent thing to do.
Right.
These are people, he took a big pay cut to do this job. I know Trump did too. And then there's some the personal stuff. I mean, I don't know what the truth is about Stormy Daniels and these things, but I pray for his family. I pray for him. If any of that's true, it's disappointing.
Yes.
And as an evangelical, I was critical of President Bill Clinton when he kind of went there, and I'm not comfortable with this. I couldn't possibly be. But the question is, if he's reconciled with his family, and he gets through his legal problems, I'm not sure it's affecting his job performance. But I can't entirely separate those two things.
Of course. And again, as evangelicals, I don't think we should. So
I don't think so.
First of all, let me just, before just run out of time here, mention that, again, joelrosenberg.com. The Joshua Fund is a link there, the books and the DVDs. But again, let me just mention the book out, The Kremlin Conspiracy. And again, Tyndale, look for it in your local bookstore. And I know that you've got all sorts of other novels planned, but this one is a little bit different than the other ones from the Middle East. So I really appreciate you taking the time to read it. Research it, then write it, and then spend some time with us.
I did read it too. Yes, that's true.
Yes, and then most importantly, spend an hour with us today here on the program.
Well, it's been an honor as always, and to do it in studio is a special blessing. It's good to be in Dallas and good to be with you, Kerby.
Well, again, thank you. And again, speaking of reading, it is worth your read, and all of these books are a number of novels over the years. I think more than a dozen, 5 different nonfiction books. And if you find yourself saying, I need to learn a little bit more, we have a link to joelrosenberg.com, and you certainly want to get some of the nonfiction books like Inside the Revolution and Epicenter. And don't forget, there's that Epicenter conference taking place in Jerusalem. So it's going to be, and I'd love you to come back and give us a report about that.
I would enjoy that. Thank you.
A great opportunity. Need to take a break. We've got a lot more to cover, but that is the hour with Joel Rosenberg. So go to our website, pointofview.net, if you'd like some more information. We'll be back right after this.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment comes I Can Only Imagine. The untold true story of Mercy Me's Bart Millard and the power of redemption and forgiveness.
My dad was a monster, and I saw God transform him. I didn't think that God could do that.
I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. In theaters March 16th. More information is available at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
When you listen to the news, do you ever feel like you're living on a different planet from those presenting the headlines? We've always known there was a subtle bias, but today, it's about as subtle as stepping off a 1,000-foot cliff. The only way to counteract that bias is with the truth. To join the Truth Team at Point of View, your support will educate and encourage potentially millions every day. Don't let lies win. Step up so that lives and our nation can be changed. Join the team at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. In the first hour, we had a chance to talk with our friend Joel Rosenberg. The Kremlin Conspiracy is his new book, and spent a lot of time talking about the news. But this hour, I want to kind of change the focus a little bit and have you think about, if you were to give a nickname to Jesus, what would it be? I never really thought about that until I read this book. And if you think about it, the nickname would be the friend of sinners, because remember, Jesus was referred to as the friend of tax collectors and sinners. Well, that's the title of this book, Friend of Sinners, Why Jesus Cares More About Relationship Than Perfection. It is written by Rich Wilkerson, Jr., individual perhaps you have followed. Certainly you might even know his parents as well. Mark Batterson says that he has inspired and deepened my walk with Christ in his new book, Friends of Sinners. And, of course, Mark's been with us as well. And if you're not familiar with Rich, of course, just a very dynamic church in the Miami area, as well as a conference they do every year. Author of the previous book, Sandcastle Kings, Meeting Jesus in a Spiritually Bankrupt World. And we're going to be spending some time today talking about Jesus, the friend of sinners. Rich, thank you for joining us here on Point of View.
Kerby, thank you so much for having me. Honored to be here. What a fun day. This is a special day for me for a couple of reasons. Number one, my son, it turned 7 weeks old today. So that's pretty awesome. And also I've got this book that's being released. So it's a fun Tuesday. I'm in New York, getting to talk to you.
Well, and that's another point I might mention, because you and your wife, we know you for lots of reasons, but one of those is your struggle with infertility. So to be talking about a child is significant at any time, but especially in light of what you and your wife went through.
Absolutely. We went on an 8-year infertility journey, and 7 weeks ago, God brought us our miracle boy. His name's Wyatt Wesley Wilkerson. And he's just a legend, and we're just so thankful. And so we kind of celebrate every week. We kind of just keep giving him birthday after birthday after birthday.
Well, he's also born into a family where a lot of you have been preachers and teachers. And so, again, we appreciate your family and appreciate you as well. And let's talk about this idea for just a minute, because you start that conversation by saying that you might have had a nickname, and we can talk about whether or not that was appropriate during dodgeball. But more importantly, Jesus had a nickname. I never thought about that, but it says a lot about the fact that sometimes we have this sort of sanctified view of Jesus, and yet you can't really read through the Gospels without realizing that Jesus was constantly condemned by the Pharisees and others because he was willing to be in and among the people and actually have dinner with sinners. Now, we've changed that view in modern 21st century culture, haven't we?
I really think we have, and this book, Friend of Sinners, really where it came out of was the book I wrote before was called Sandcastle Kings, and it was actually when I was in New York, kind of like I am this week, and I was doing sort of a press run and getting to talk to people. I was kind of surprised, almost taken aback a little bit by how often the conversation would kind of drift towards maybe different people that I know that maybe they're famous or they're celebrities that maybe do not stand for Christian values or Christian lifestyles. And I was just shocked by how many questions would come up about that, going, how can a pastor be associated or have friendships with some of these people? And it really just made me realize that there was a need, I felt like, that we needed to talk about the fact that God's heart has always been for people. And as we encounter Jesus ourselves, we too should have a heart for people. And so what you see about Jesus is that as you read through the Gospels, just like you're saying, everywhere he was going, he was constantly engaging with culture. He was constantly befriending and building relationship yes, ultimately to save them, but I also think that relationship was his heart, that he loves people. People were not projects to him. They were the heart of God and why he came. And Jesus, I think Luke 19, story of Zacchaeus, there he goes, and everyone goes, he's gone to be the guest of a sinner. And more as we see this, we discover his heart. And as we discover his heart, I think it needs to become our heart as believers, that we too would love people, love them right where they are. And I love how the Bible says in John chapter 1 that Jesus came in grace and truth. Mm-hmm. I love that because we see the tension there, that yes, he's full of mercy, he's full of grace, but he's also full of truth. Like he's a perfect God. He's sinless. Yet I think the order matters too. I think grace has to come before truth. And I think we need to build relationships. And as we build relationships, then I think we can actually be truthful with people.
Again, let's just explain for people that don't know you very well. One of the things you talk about in the book is there was a picture of you, I think it was on Instagram, where people said, how'd you associate with him? But I would think most people would know that you were the pastor that married Kanye West, so that wouldn't be enough deal breaker for at least the Pharisees in our audience, don't you think? Because you're hanging with some people that you wouldn't necessarily expect an evangelical pastor to be hanging with. Talk about that.
Yeah, I think that's just kind of been our journey. We never had a goal or like a strategy to be in some of the circles or some of the spaces that God's allowed us into. But I don't know. It's just been sort of our journey of how we've ended up in some of these places with some well-known people. And, yeah, I got to do the wedding for Kanye and Kim. They're both friends of mine. They're people that we're on the faith journey with. And there was a lot of backlash about that. And there's been other stories and other people where a photo's gone up. And I remember in one particular case, what I talk about in the book was a photo that went up with me and somebody, and all these comments came in. This one comment in particular said, how on earth could you associate yourself with someone like that, Rich? And my answer was really, really easy. Because Jesus chooses to associate himself with me. Like, I am imperfect, sinful, full of sin, and Jesus came and extended his hand and extended an opportunity for relationship. And that is the gospel. And it was funny. I think you'll find this funny. I started writing this book, must have been 2 years ago, and I was telling a friend of mine who believes in God, and he comes to church when he's in Miami with me, but he's on the journey of faith for sure, and he's figuring out what he believes. But I said, I'm writing this book, and it's going to be called Friend of Sinners. And he said, oh, no, bro, you cannot write that book. He's like, all of your friends, they're going to turn their back on you. I started to laugh because I realized he thought I was speaking about myself, that I am Rich Wilkerson Jr., the friend of sinners. And I said, no, man, this was a nickname of Jesus. This is who our God is, and that we are all sinners. And I think that's the thing we always forget, is that we are the sinners. Like, as I'm writing this book, this is not like a book for a certain category of people. Like, in the book, I clearly define that every one of us, apart from Jesus, we are fallen. We are sinners. We're broken. But the good news of the gospel is that he's come for relationship with us. And so it was just a funny moment as I was talking to this guy, because I probably need to clarify that sometimes, that this is a book about Jesus and about God, and that he is the friend of sinners.
Yeah. Well, and we'll take a break, but when we come back, I want to have you speak to that a little bit more, because I love one of the lines in here. You say, it's easy to judge the Pharisees. They're the bad guys. It seems like they are the fictitious Disney characters to us. You say, I always imagine Jafar from Aladdin every time I read the word Pharisee, but yet from time to time I think there's a Pharisee inside of each of us. So before we talk about Jesus, let's talk about the way in which we react, the way even people will react to this book, and we'll see how well it sells in the bookstores, because of the problem is we have so sort of sanitized who Jesus is. We forget that this is the Jesus that ate with sinners. We forget this is the Jesus that overturned money tables. We just sort of have a Jesus in our own mind's eye, and this book is a very helpful biblical corrective. And it's published, by the way, by Thomas Nelson, and so you, again, have the book coming out. We have information about that. We have information about Rich Wilkerson Jr. on the website as well, pointofview.net. But we need to take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation today about a book that might provide a healthy corrective that we all need. We'll continue our conversation with Rich Wilkerson right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, one of the questions that surfaces repeatedly from the shooting in Parkland, Florida, is why the FBI and local law enforcement didn't do more to stop him. He was a ticking time bomb who posted a number of threatening messages, and he assaulted students, cursed at teachers, kicked in classroom doors, started fistfights, and threw chairs. Despite all of this behavior online and in person, he was never arrested. He was transferred from school to school, and he eventually was sent back to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, but no other action was taken. One possible explanation was the Promise program that was developed to keep young people out of the criminal justice system. It was enacted as a policy to end the school-to-prison pipeline. Proponents wanted to prevent minority students from ending up in prison because they were disciplined at school. Their concern was that when the police are on a school campus, in order to protect students, they end up arresting students for minor offenses. These students then get a criminal record, which often leads to prison rather than to college. The Promise program was implemented at Broward County 4 years ago because it had the most school-related arrests in Florida. The agreement with the Broward County Public Schools prevented the police from dealing with misdemeanors and other offenses. Instead, school administrators would deal with such issues. That may explain why there seemed to be a hands-off policy towards the shooter and other students. Proponents reject the idea that the Promise program prevented legal action against the shooter. They point out that he was expelled from the school for disciplinary reasons a year before the shooting. While that's true, you have to wonder about the impact such a policy had in creating a mindset that prevented intervention by law enforcement. I think this explains why so little action was taken against the shooter. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment, I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG, in theaters March 16th. More information at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Well, you should be spending some time today with Pastor Rich Wilkerson, Jr. The book is entitled Friends of Sinners. It's published by Thomas Nelson. It is out now. You should be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we also have a link in case you wanted to get it in paperback or Kindle. Also have a link to Rich's church, and we'll get into that in just a minute. But I might mention, Rich, that even as we get into the book, there are all sorts of YouTube videos that I've seen, and I think others have. But you also have put together a study guide, a series of DVD resources so that people, if they would like to cover some of this in their church, don't have to reinvent the wheel. They can benefit from all the work that you've put in trying to put this particular book and resource together.
Yeah, we've put together a study guide and even a sermon series. The sermon series, actually, all of that content's free on friendofsinners.co. The study guide is in partnership with Thomas Nelson, and that's for small group and small group training. That's got new content where I do DVD teaching, where I teach the book in a really cool setting, and then it comes with another resource, which is a book with content within there that you can teach the material. So on one side, you can get the sermon series stuff, which I think is really, really great. That's free of charge, and then the study guide, which goes a little bit deeper and have me teach to your small group or at your church. That's all available as well. So we're excited about both of those resources.
Let's talk about Pharisees because, it's real easy to say, Pharisees, if you were to do an old vaudeville play, the Pharisees come in and we go, boo, that kind of stuff. But what you do very early on, both in the book and in some of your videos that I've seen, is you remind us that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We sometimes say, well, I'm better than that sinner over here. Jesus even spoke to that. But Jesus ultimately loved us. And from Jesus' point of view, we're the worst sinners. And, of course, even the Apostle Paul, who himself was a Pharisee, acknowledged that he was the worst of all sinners. So in some respects, we need to get off of this comparison and recognize that we're grateful that God did meet with sinners, because we're one of those sinners, aren't we?
We absolutely are. And I think that the more we follow Jesus, the closer we get to Jesus, the more we discover just really how far away we were to begin with. The more I worship him, the more I get to know him, I discover, wow, like I was so empty apart from God. I think the challenge that we do have, though, is that I see a natural proclivity in me and in other people that sometimes we can become a Pharisee to Pharisees. And what I mean is we can become judgmental towards judgmental people. We can become religious towards religious people, meaning the thing that we are trying so hard not to become, we become that towards them. I think this is a scary situation because I have a tendency, even though I'm a gospel preacher and I've given a lot of my life to studying Jesus and to talking about Jesus, I can get these like habits going where I'm going, oh man, those religious people, they're so annoying or so frustrating. And while I'm doing that, I'm becoming just like them.
Yes.
And so chapter 1 is called Missed Message.
Right.
And we got to get back to what the message of the gospel is, because I believe it's Matthew 9 when Jesus has his encounter with Matthew, the tax collector, a.k.a. Levi, the tax collector. He goes to this party, and he's at this party with other tax collectors. And the Bible doesn't say that these other tax collectors have a conversion moment or a salvation moment. Jesus is just there, and he's doing life with them. And the Pharisees come up, we know the story, and they're criticizing him like they normally do. And there Jesus makes this big statement that we all love. He said, I didn't come for the healthy, I came for the sick. And what he's saying right there at that moment, though, is that I've come for people that recognize that they're sick. You have to. The only thing that's like a prerequisite to getting in a relationship with God is recognizing that you need the friendship, you need the relationship.
Yes.
And if we're not careful, we can think that his message was a self-help message. We can think it's a morality message, a behavior modification message, a political message, a social justice message, all these other things. But it's not. It's actually a Savior. You were dead in your sins message. All of us. The playing field is level for all of us. We were all dead, all fallen short. And we all start the same way. And we all have to be born again. And so I think we have to keep that at the forefront of everything that we do. And all of our ministry and all of the resources that we give out, all the supplement ministry that we provide. I love all these things, but we've got to make sure the gospel's at the forefront, that we know what the message is. Jesus Christ came, took everything that I deserved so I could get everything that he deserved. Wow, this is good news.
Good news.
I don't want to for one second forget that he has grace for those that commit the crime, and he has grace for those that judge the crime. He loves both of us. It's that beautiful story, Luke 15, right? The prodigal son.
Yes.
Well, we always just preach one angle, but there's two sons. There's the prodigal who ran away, and then there's the older brother who stays at home. And in both instances, we see the father, he runs towards the prodigal, and the father also goes out in the front yard and pleads with the older brother to come into the party. Like, I love that picture. And that's the friend that I want to be like that. I want to be gracious towards both sides. I want to be a man of forgiveness, a man of mercy. I want to be a friend to sinners. I don't know what kind of sinner you are, prodigal or Pharisee, self-righteousness, self-destructiveness, legalism, license. Okay, God has grace for both of you, and he wants to meet both of you.
Again, the book, Friend of Sinners, and it really is broken down into 3 sections. We're focusing at the moment on Christ, the scandal of the gospel, 4 chapters there. Then part 2 is Culture, God's love for the world, 3 chapters. And then finally, a section on the church, the mission of the believer. And you talked about the mixed message, but I thought another one I might want to jump to is weight shift. You use as an illustration something we've all faced. You grew up for a short time in Washington, and I've backpacked all over California, Oregon, Washington, Montana. And, sometimes you have some people have too much in their pack, and so you talk about that. But as we were talking about the Apostle Paul, you talk about the weights we carry. Most of us recognize that the weights we carry will be our failures, but you point out something that might have been insightful to people as they're reading through this book, because Paul also had to let go of his successes. And we oftentimes think that the weight in our backpack is our failures, our family backgrounds, all those kinds of things that we would like to remove from our backs. But sometimes success can weigh us down as well. And I thought that was one of the great insights from that chapter as well.
I appreciate you saying that. I think it's just the truth. I think that there's so many, yesterday's performance for sure can weigh us down, worry of tomorrow, but just the pressure of today is one of the areas I'm talking about. And I've learned that the devil can't kill you with failure. He'll distract you with success.
Yes.
And many times we just get so caught up trying to perform and trying to be all that we want to be. And this has been huge in my life. I was just taking a walk today. We've been doing some different interviews here in New York, and I was just walking with my brother-in-law through Soho before I got on the phone with you. And I was just talking about the journey of life and the journey of faith. And one of the key principles for me is to live a life of gratitude and to not take any of it for granted. Because sometimes, even when things are going good, if you don't stay thankful and if you don't stay in a perspective going, man, I'm so grateful for this opportunity, trying to live up to whatever you think you're supposed to be can be such a weight that comes down on you. And what I love about Jesus and the message of the gospel is that it's a weight shift. Every single day we have a chance to transfer our weight onto Jesus. He says, cast all your cares upon me, is what Peter says, for he cares for us. And that little verse has brought me so much hope and so much encouragement. The reason why I can cast my care is because he cares about me. You wouldn't want to cast your weight onto somebody who didn't care about you, who's going to be careless with it or drop it. But we know that Jesus cares for us. He says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. That burden is not just the mistakes you made. It might be the pressure of what you are trying to live up to. He says, you don't have to live up to that. You're already approved, accepted, and loved by me right where you are today. Now, with this brand new sense of identity and love and affirmation from me, now you're freed up to perform. Now you're freed up to do incredible things, not to earn my approval, but because you already have my approval. And Weight Shift is one of my favorite chapters because, it's something that I'm trying to practice every day. It's something that I want to get good at, and I want to lean on Jesus in every facet of my life, not just for salvation, but I want to lean on him for relationship, just whatever I'm going into. And that ending illustration was I did a semester abroad in Cambridge in college, had a beautiful time, did a wonderful course on C.S. Lewis there, and got to travel all through UK, and we were in the Lakes District doing a backpacking trip, and I'll just never forget it because there was this girl who would just fall into the back of the line, fall into the back of the line, fall into the back of the line, and she wasn't really in shape. And finally, the guide came to the back of the line and said, "Hey, come on, let me carry your pack, and let's make a weight shift." And she says, "But then if you're carrying my pack, how will you do that?" He's like, "Trust me, I've done this before."
Done this before. Great line.
This isn't my first rodeo. You know what I mean?
My first rodeo.
I've been on this mountain plenty of times. It's your first time, but I've come up this thing.
That's great.
And give me your pack,
We need to take a break, but when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more. We've talked about Christ. Let's talk about culture. Jesus did not come to make good people better. He came to make dead people alive. What does it mean when the gospel goes into individuals, and what kind of change do we see in the culture? What is God's love for the world? We'll continue our conversation with Rich Wilkerson Jr. as we continue to talk about his book, Friend of Sinners. That coming up right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants his best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Privileged to have with us today Pastor Rich Wilkerson, Jr. And again, if you are not familiar with him, we have a link to his church website as well as information about the book. And, of course, we also can give links to a couple of the other websites, Rich. And, of course, even as people go out on YouTube video, I know you and your wife have done some great pieces over the years teaching out of God's words. There's one where you go into your home and you talk about infertility. So you have done such a great job over these years of trying to educate people and to really make the Christian message relevant to the issues people are dealing with every single day.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we try to use the tools that we've got. Try to, the message stays the same, but the methods, they come and go. And so we're just trying to figure out different platforms to share the gospel, share the good news. And we've tried to, I love that verse from Paul. Paul said, we didn't just preach the gospel, we share our lives with you in Thessalonians. And we've always tried to model that of just going, we're not just going to teach, but we're going to also go on the journey with people, especially in our church back home in Miami. Just it's a faith community that we journey together. And so mountaintops together, valleys together, and go through the pain together and see the promise fulfilled together.
Talk about your church for just a minute. I know in 2 months I'm going to be in Miami, and I might sit in the back or something like that. But talk about the church and the conference and some of the things that you're doing as well.
Yeah, so we planted this church 2.5 years ago, and we were sent out from my father's church, Trinity Church, in Miami Gardens area. We were sent down into the Wynwood kind of arts district of Miami. And we really just kind of began out of my house, and God has just done an incredible work. In the last 2.5 years, we were in 6 services up until January in a middle school. People would load in at 5:45 in the morning, and we'd have a 9 a.m., 11 a.m., 1 p.m., 4 p.m., 6 p.m., 8 p.m. I'd preach all 6 in a row.
I can't even
And then
imagine.
we'd load out till 11 p.m. at night. It was crazy. And so really just a lot of incredible growth. God just doing miraculous work. And so now we're in 2 locations, which has really been able to help us focus and get a little bit healthier, I think, in terms of not having to do such the same amount of quantity of work, but really be able to reach more people through 2 locations. But the church is called VU Church, which is short for rendezvous, which just means the meeting place. And it's an amazing, amazing place. And week after week, I feel like God's just doing something special and significant. But we also, we host a conference every year on South Beach called VU Conference.
VU Conference, yeah.
And we hosted at the historical Fillmore Theater, the old Jackie Gleason Theater there. It's like 2,500 people, and it's really a special time. It's really, we've kind of put the conference around 3 things, which is encountering God, really equipping the church, and empowering next generation leaders. So that's really what the conference is centered around. It's centered around really, I think, dynamic preaching and moments where we get to encounter God's presence in a tangible way. But then we also have wanted to try to give away tools to the church. It's like you can build a house, but if you don't have a hammer and nails, it's pretty difficult. And so trying to figure out how to resource the church specifically, whether that's through content, whether that's through trainings. But then also I have a leading in my heart to really empower next generation leaders, not just church leaders, but leaders in every facet of life, and want to see the next generation really resourced and equipped to lead stronger. And so that's what we're really focusing on: people coming, encountering God's presence, being equipped, hearing about maybe some of the new trends, new methods, new tools they can be using to get the message out, but then also being empowered, feeling a sense of boldness and courage as they leave, going, I can do this. I can make a difference wherever I am. And so we're pumped about it.
Well, again, we certainly have that same vision here. Matter of fact, tomorrow on our Wednesday Millennial Roundtable, we talk about leadership and training leaders, and have all sorts of millennials. I'm just the honorary non-millennial that sits around the table, and just a great opportunity once again to do some of the kind of things you do through the VU Conference as well as what you do at church. And let's get back to the book for a few minutes. The Friend of Sinners is the title of the book. The first section is on Christ, the scandal of the gospel. But I wanted to focus a little time on culture, God's love for the world. And some people might say, well, you're kind of a young guy. What do you know about culture? Let me just mention this one. You've logged over 2 million air miles preaching the gospel around the world. Those words come off really easy, but if you've ever traveled, as many of us around the table have over the years, you know what 2 million miles, that's a lot of road wear. But it also has given you a chance to really think about how the gospel needs to be communicated in different cultures and different settings. True?
I hope so. I mean, that's kind of the angle maybe we're trying to believe that other people will relate to. But I think I have, at a young age, been able to have a great opportunity to really travel the world and get to see the different contexts of how people are contextualizing the gospel to where they are. And for me, this whole section of the book, culture and God's love for the world, it's just so important. I think that as Christians, we get a bigger perspective, we get a bigger idea. I think that whatever we avoid, the devil tends to invade. And I think there's been a lot of retreating from Christians as opposed to infiltrating. And I think what it comes down to is that we've got talking points and we've got convictions. And when people don't adhere to our convictions, we get really confused and we just kind of avoid them. And I think we have to be comfortable in our skin enough to realize, man, God loves this place called the world. He doesn't just love the church. He loves the world. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And if God loved the world and if God died for the world, well, then we have to at least begin to engage and start conversations with the world and attempt to love the world like he did. And so the reason why this whole section, I think, is in the book and so important is that I'm trying to get, really in this section, believers to get a glimpse of God's heart for humanity and the fact that we should have a heart for humanity. And what does that look like? How do we navigate? How do we engage? I think love is a universal language, and I think when we go in and we actually try to build a relationship first, it's amazing to see the effects it can have, and it's amazing to see the life transformation that can occur.
Well, and we lost, of course, Billy Graham recently, and as they've been doing all of these stories about him, and just the other day I interviewed the person that wrote the official biography of him years ago, A Prophet with Honor, and now is updated with 4 more chapters. The word that comes out time and time again is love. Matter of fact, he says, ultimately it's the God and the Holy Spirit that convicts, but my job is simply to love. And so here, if you see one of the most successful, perhaps the most successful evangelist, certainly in our generation or maybe in history, and he realized how it was important to love everyone and to tear down any barriers. We now hear stories about tearing down ropes that would have allowed for segregated crusades, and he would not allow that, and reaching out to people throughout the world. It seems to me that that's a very good role model, Rich, for those of us that say, well, how do I reach my neighbors? Well, maybe you start loving them first, and you'll have a chance to reach your neighbors.
Yeah, I think Billy Graham obviously is just a hero in every sense of the word. I mean, this man, we're still, kind of like drifting, or what's the right word I'm looking for, drafting off of his wake, man. I mean, just the things that he did and accomplished is mind-boggling, perplexing, and inspiring, to say the least. One of the things that that I've been so inspired by his life is that he, to me, represents what this book's all about. Is I feel like he never retreated. He would engage. He would go to where people are. He wasn't just like trying to have crusades that come to me. He would go to where people are and build relationship. He would go on the talk shows. He would go into these spaces that in many times could be very scary for a Christian. And he did it with such grace. He never compromised the truth. And, yeah, we lost a living legend. I don't think there will ever be another Billy Graham in the way that he did it. So I think we're so thankful to have a man like that. But I'm grateful for his testimony. I'm grateful for the things that he said, because we stand upon those words. And he's absolutely right. Like, our job is not to judge. I really believe that Christians just need to get a revelation. Hey, why don't we love them and let God change them? And that's the truth. That's kind of a hard thing, I think, to come to terms with, that we can't change people. I can't change my wife. I've been married to her for 11 years. My goodness. I can't change myself, for goodness sake. It's Jesus that does the changing in us. We have to surrender, and he does something on the inside of us. Our job is to love people. Paul said, I planted seed, Apollos watered seed. It's only God who brings the increase. It's God who makes it grow. And that's our part to play. That's our part in this whole thing, is our job. We're messengers. We're mailmen. We're going to bring the message. We're going to bring the truth. We're going to bring the grace. But then let's allow God to to do the work that only he can do. And when he does it, it's so much better anyways.
Yes. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we will continue our conversation for just a few more minutes with Rich Wilkerson, Jr., friend of sinners, in that third section, Church, the mission of the believer. We certainly want to give some context to what we're talking about. We want to give you some marching orders. We really want to give you some shoe leather to what we're talking about here today. And if you've just joined us, let me just mention that in addition to this book, there is a study guide, there are DVDs, all sorts of other things you can find out about. You can find all those resources and those links on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Mainers want their state lawmakers to see red, at least while they're hunting. Amish families throughout the state of Maine hunt for their food. As you may know, the Amish religiously shun many modern conveniences in accordance with their religious customs requiring a simple life. That includes while they're hunting. You see, most states require hunters to wear blaze orange while hunting. This increases visibility to other hunters and increases hunter safety. But it's pretty flashy, too flashy, in fact, for the simple ways of the Amish. So they are asking for a religious accommodation in the law. If approved, Amish Mainers will be permitted to wear red instead of blaze orange. It would seem to be in the best interest of Maine to follow the lead of several states in providing this accommodation. Several Amish have pledged to disobey the blaze orange law and, if cited, refuse to pay the fine. This simple accommodation would prevent the needless punishment by the state of its religious citizens and any lawsuits challenging such a burden on the free exercise of their religion. But it should not have to go to court. By a simple spin of the color wheel and a few votes in the legislature, it would seem that the state could achieve its interest in hunter safety while honoring the religious conscience of the Amish. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Rich Wilkerson, Jr. with us for a few more minutes, and in the first section of his book, we talked about Jesus, his grace, his acceptance, his love for everyone. Then in the second section, we've talked a little bit about God's passion for the world and culture. Now we want to look at this section on the church, of the mission of the believer, and really, in a sense, what is our calling and followers? And you use the example of a neighborhood, and I think, Rich, almost all of us have had get off the lawn kind of neighbor, but you had one when you were growing up in Tacoma. You call him Tom, and who knows what his real name was, but we all can relate to a grumpy neighbor, an older gentleman, get off my grass, get off my lawn, I'm going to call the police on you kind of thing. But you use that as an illustration to look at the parable of the Good Samaritan, but it really could be just as easily as you say, who's my neighbor? And that's a question we need to ask, because it's not enough for us to sit in church, in your wonderful church, and hear your sermons and to watch the videos. It's not enough to even read our Bibles and raise our kids. As important as all of that is, we need to take the gospel into the world. And yet, even with the Great Commission, there was a tendency, I think, for the Jews to say, well, we'll go to Judea, we're going to miss Samaria, and we may not even go to the othermost parts of the world. And we need to understand who our neighbor is, don't we?
I think we absolutely do. And it's funny because that's the question that gets asked to Jesus. And Jesus, classic Jesus, they ask him a question and he asks them a question back. He tells them this story about the Good Samaritan, which is about this Samaritan man who gets robbed and beaten up and left on the side of the road. Then a priest walks by, a Levite walks by, and then all of a sudden the Samaritan, this guy, he comes by, and the Samaritan obviously is an enemy to the Jewish man who had been beat up. Yet the Samaritan is the only one that actually comes and does something about it, picks the man up and helps the man, takes him to an inn, pays for him to be looked after, and says, hey, I'm going to come back in a few days to make sure he's okay. And Jesus tells this whole story. I love it. He goes, now, which one do you think is the good neighbor? And really my challenge in that chapter is we got to quit asking all the time, who's my neighbor? We should start asking, am I a good neighbor? I want to be a good neighbor, because my neighbor is every person I come in contact with. It's just the reality. It's not the guy who's literally on my street, and people are desperate for the love of Jesus. And you and I, we play the part of being Jesus to people that will never walk into our churches, that will never open up a Bible. We have these opportunities to be a good neighbor. And so rather than wonder who the person is, we're called, like you just said, the Great Commission, to reach the world with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And the question we should be asking ourselves is, am I a good neighbor? Yet the funny thing about the whole story of the Good Samaritan, right, is Jesus tells this whole story, and like he always does, he's got a deeper point. This man, he's challenged, going, wow, I don't know if I can love like that, and this is deep, deep love, and I wonder if there's anybody who could actually do that. And Jesus is kind of standing there going, yep, I know somebody. I'm that guy. I am the Good Samaritan. I came and bandaged you up. I was your enemy. You didn't even know my name. Yet I came and I took your wounds and I took your pain and I bandaged you up and I paid the bill. All these things are all gospel and grace themes that Jesus over and over again, they're these overturns of his life and who he is. And so that chapter is a huge challenge to the church and to the world to say, man, let's go out and live realizing not, am I going to pick and choose who I'm going to love? No, I'm going to decide that I'm going to live my life being a good neighbor. Whoever I come in contact with, my love's not going to be dictated based upon what they do or don't do. My love's going to be decided because I've been loved by God in my state, that I can love people wherever they are.
Yes. And again, you grew up for a while in Tacoma, which is pretty white, but you are in Miami now, and I go to Miami every once in a while, and I know there's certain neighborhoods where I wish I had worked harder on my Spanish than I did in the past. And Miami is just an international city, and because of that, you really have to go beyond your comfort zone. You have to, if you're really going to be a good neighbor, you're going to have to meet people from different cultures, different nations, different ethnic backgrounds. There's a section where you say, don't get too comfortable. And it seems to me that if we're really going to be what God has called us to be, we need to spend a fair amount of time outside of our comfort zone, don't we?
Yeah, you got to be comfortably uncomfortable. That's the gospel. Jesus Christ got uncomfortable for us in order to comfort us, And once we've been comforted by God, I think we're then called to go and get uncomfortable for God. God fills us up in order to spill us out. God fills us up in order to spill us out. And we're going to only see the world change and the world impacted when we get up out of the lazy boy chair, and walk across the street and meet people and encounter people and love people where they are. And that can be uncomfortable. But if we're ever going to see change take place, it will always happen outside of the comfort zone.
Wow. I wish we could get you to Dallas occasionally, because we do this Millennial Roundtable, and I'd love to have you and Nick Pitts and Chelsea Yeoman and some others, all part of the Millennials, talking about what we need to do to reach your generation and even to reach the older generation, and also how we really need to be if you will, the ambassadors for Christ, salt and light in the world. But just for a few minutes, Rich, because I know people kind of tune in and tune out, talk again about some of the resources available at your church website and at the Friend of Sinners website, because I suspect right now there may be pastors, Sunday school leaders, small group leaders saying, ooh, this would be a really good study, but where do I get started?
Absolutely. Well, number one, I definitely want to come out to Dallas. We got to figure out how to do that. We'd love to hang out with you. It'd be a great time. But number two, you can go to vuchurch.com, which is where all of our weekly content always goes up, with our YouTube channel, messages from Sunday. We've always got different things happening in the midweek where we do small group trainings. We do fun interviews like this with different people. But in regards to Friend of Sinners, the book that is released today, right now, nationwide, go pick it up. Please support it. Help it out. Friend of Sinners, Why Jesus Cares More About Relationship Than Perfection. I would encourage people to check out the Friend of Sinners website, friendofsinners.co. And there on the website, there's lots of additional resources on top of the book. We have for sale the Friend of Sinners study guide, which is another book that supplements with this. That's for teaching the material, for small groups, for churches. I also do some teaching on there where you can get that, I think, in DVD format. You can bring that to your church. You can bring that to your Sunday school class or your small group. But then there's also free resources on there for sermon series. We've got the artwork there. We've got study guides as well for small groups. So that stuff's all free of charge. But just lots of resources to try to get people having conversation around this topic, this idea, who Jesus is. He is the friend of sinners, which means he's the friend of all of us. And our responsibility is to simply recognize that we are sinners and that he's our Savior. And when we recognize that and call out for his help, he comes and he serves us every single time. And just really hoping that this book encourages people. I think this is a book for Christians for sure, to remind them of the gospel, but this is also a great resource and a great book for people that don't know God or are far from God. I think this is a great introduction for them to discover who Jesus is and what his message was all about.
A great evangelistic opportunity. Let me mention one more time, we have a link to vuchurch.com. We also, next to the picture of Rich, have a link to his Facebook page and his Twitter account. And then also, you know what I oftentimes suggest when a book first comes out, there are some videos, and we've got a click there that you can go and see the trailer. It's 3.5 minutes long. And so my suggestion is for you to watch the trailer, and then there's a share button at the corner there. So I encourage you, after you've watched it, to post it on your Facebook page or send it to someone. Maybe you know a church person that would like to actually develop this for the church. So it could be a pastor or a Sunday school leader, something like that. Let's see if we can get some visibility for this new book, Friend of Sinners. So, Rich, thank you for being with us here on Point of View. Let's do it again soon.
Thank you so much, Kirby. Appreciate you guys.
We are going to have to take a break. We are out of time today, and certainly tomorrow we'll do our Millennial Roundtable. Certainly want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Go to the website, pointofview.net. You'll find all the links necessary for the book by Joel Rosenberg in the first hour and the book by Rich Wilkerson in the second hour. We'll be back tomorrow right here on Point of View.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment comes I Can Only Imagine. The untold true story of Mercy Me's Bart Millard and the power of redemption and forgiveness.
My dad was a monster, and I saw God transform him. I didn't think that God could do that.
I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. In theaters March 16th. More information is available at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
When you listen to the news, do you ever feel like you're living on a different planet from those presenting the headlines? We've always known there was a subtle bias, but today, it's about as subtle as stepping off a 1,000-foot cliff. The only way to counteract that bias is with the truth. To join the Truth Team at Point of View, your support will educate and encourage potentially millions every day. Don't let lies win. Step up so that lives and our nation can be changed. Join the team at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.